All right, guys, welcome to the Weld Symbols module. This one's going to be a little different than some of the other PowerPoints, as most of these are visual. So we're going to start through this. Maybe. Okay, upon completion of this module, you will be able to identify and explain various parts of the weld symbol, identify and explain fillet and groove weld symbols, read weld symbols on drawing specifications and weld procedure specifications, and interpret weld symbols from a print. Okay, upon completion of this module, you'll be able to identify some common hazards in welding, explain and identify proper PPE used in welding, describe how to avoid welding fumes. That doesn't make sense. Explain some of the causes of accidents, identify and explain uses for material safety data sheets, explain safe technique for storing and handling cylinders, and explain how to avoid electric shock when welding, describe proper materials handling. Not sure how this relates to symbols, but it's in there. Okay, so the basic parts of the weld symbol are shown here, the reference line and the arrow line to the joint. Okay, now here we've also added a tail, still with the same reference line and with the arrow line. Within the tail, you'll have data, instructions, and notes. When we use symbols for our weld prompts, when we do our welding contests here, that's where we put which electrodes to be used, or any other special instructions would be placed within the tail of the symbol. Okay, when it comes to placement of the weld location on the joint is determined by where the symbol is placed on the reference line. So whenever it's under the line, then the weld is on the arrow side of the joint. Whenever it's over the line, it's on the other side. And that doesn't matter which side the symbol's placed on or anything like that, or which side the reference and arrow line are placed on. If the symbol's on the bottom, it's always on the side that the arrow's pointing to. If the symbol's on top, it's on the side opposite, the other side of where the arrow's pointing. Okay, so here's a couple to look at. This actually is taken directly from the exam. So you need to look through these. Fillet weld on the arrow side. We go back here real quick. Arrow side's always on the bottom. So 16 will be A. V groove weld on the arrow side, that would be D for 17. V groove weld on both sides would be F. Fillet weld on both sides would be C. And a V groove weld on the other side would actually be D. Okay, so pretty basic. You know, V groove is a V. The fillet symbol, it's a triangle, kind of similar to what if you did a cross section of the weld would look like on a fillet weld. Okay, so this one here, I want you guys to pay attention to this, get a good look at it. I believe it's the next slide that has all the information we really want. But, you know, arrow line, that's going to be M. Let's see, field weld symbol, that is going to be K. That's number 23. Specification of process is going to be B there. Reference line will be N. And then groove weld size, this is always the one I kind of mess up on, so I have to look at the next. So let's see here, groove weld size. So if we go back here real quick, groove weld size is shown there as D. Okay. So this figure right here is listed in your book, second or third page in on the chapter. This is probably, if you studied this, you know, mainly this, you would have just about every piece of information you need for this test. This is really an important image to have when it comes to using weld symbols. Okay. Here's just an example of some of those different symbols being used without quite all the clutter on there. Okay, groove welds and other welds. So this is just showing some of the symbols that could be used. You know, square groove, a bevel, a flare. If you look, the way that those symbols are drawn, it really mimics the actual look of the weld or the joint prior to welding. the other welds, fillet welds, plug welds, just be able to identify these. Okay, types of joints. Okay, and so this has to do with how the two plates are arranged and the welds are placed in there. So we have a butt joint, which is similar to what we do when we do a V-groove weld. And actually, when you do a corner joint, a lap joint, or a T-joint, and all those different arrangements, you actually would be placing a fillet weld. A flange lap joint, it's going to be kind of a fillet. Can be difficult to weld inside those corners like that. And then on the bottom, we have some edge welds. Edge welds are always kind of frustrating. There's not a lot of place for the heat to move. So and we've dealt with that a little bit in some of our practice pieces. Okay, some groove welds, just showing some examples. You know, got a good visual there. You know, just remember, arrow side is always on the bottom, other side is always on top. Okay, so the dash line indicates the joint preparation. So as you can see, that that line kind of makes a little bit of a dog leg there around at the end, but the joint preparation is on the arrow side again. If you look at where those are placed, where the drawings are placed. Okay, so in this symbol here, we can see that the symbols are tacked. So what we're seeing on the other side, so on top of the reference line, is a fillet weld between the two plates. On the bottom side, bottom of the reference line for the arrow side, we've got an edge prep on the plate, creating a bevel, and then a subsequent fillet weld. Okay, now we're looking at sizing of welds. So this is just telling us what the leg length will be. So that 1/4, I'm going to assume inch, based on the way it's drawn there, is actually the length of that portion of the fillet weld. So it's from the root of the fillet weld up to where the toe touches the plate. Okay, same here. The 6 that's listed there, that's going to be the length of the weld. Okay, sizing of fillet welds. So sizing of fillet welds, when we look at that leg size, we look on the convex fillet weld, it's real easy to see what that leg size is. And we're looking at the effective throw to the weld. So that's where they calculate the strength of the weld, and the actual throat is actually all the way out to the face of the weld. And if we look at a concave fillet weld, the effective and the actual throat are actually the same measurement. But again, you look, the toe of the welds and the legs are actually slightly longer, but due to the convex nature of it, the leg is only as long as a straight line drawn just under the low spot at the center of the weld, on the weld face there. Okay, so on this one here, we actually have a fillet weld that now is going to have an equal size leg. So it's like when we were welding our 6-pass fillets, you guys were ending up with welds that were a lot longer on the horizontal plate than on the vertical plate. Well, now this actually specifies to have a weld that's welded in that fashion. Okay, length and pitch. So what we have here is length and pitch is, you have the length listed, that's how long the welds are, and the pitch is the center to center distance of each weld. And this can be done in 2 ways. If you notice on the top, there's intermittent welding where the welds line up. On the bottom, it's actually a staggered, where the measurements are the same, but one side the welds are in between the welds on the opposite side. Okay, this is just showing a visual of what some of these edge preps look like that we're seeing here to the right, the symbols that are used. Okay, joint preparation. We look down there on C and D. That joint actually shows a given depth, and that's for a partial joint penetrating weld. And then on the top on A and B there, that joint prep is actually all the way through. Now here we also have a we have a size given for the depth of the groove, and then also a size given for the complete size of the weld, including where it's melted into the base metal. So we've got a weld size or joint penetration and a depth of groove. Okay, and here's just a visual of what the symbol below will show in the joint preparation there. Okay, again, another visual. Okay, now we're looking at plug welds. So there's a typical plug weld there at the bottom. That's just where basically one plate's overlaid over another with holes drilled in it, and then it's welded through the holes. Slots are the same as plugs, except just an elongated hole or slot. Pretty basic. Okay, and then when we look at weld symbols with multiple operations on the same joint, the reference line closest to the arrow is always the first operation, and then as it goes further out, subsequently first, second, third, and so on. Okay, again, here's another example of it. And again, another example. So on symbol A there, we're doing a V-groove weld all the way around, and then it would be UT'd all the way around. And in B, you're doing a U-groove weld in the field on the arrow side, and then you're going to back gouge and do a U-groove weld in the field on the other side. Okay, here's a few other symbols. Okay, here's the symbol in place and looking at the weld. So instead of drawing a symbol on each leg of the channel iron there, the symbol is drawn in one position, and with the circle around where the arrow meets the reference line, that tells you to weld all the way around. Okay, here's another field weld symbol. Okay. So here we have a couple of other symbols that have been added. So in the weld on the left, you're going to be welding a V groove. Fully penetrates the joint, and then once it's welded, you'll machine the face of the weld to where it's flush with the plates. And then on the fillet weld there on the right, we're actually going to grind it until it has a concave shape. Okay, finishing methods. If we looked on the previous slide, it had a G for grinding, but it could also be chipping, hammering, machining, rolling, or it could be unspecified. They could just give you a finish or a desired profile that they want, and then it's up to you. Okay, here's some other symbols that you may or may not see. Identifying backer, or if there's going to be a back weld, or if you're going to have melt through, or if it's just going to be surface welds. Okay, here's some examples. If we look at the top symbol in preparation, that is actually a good drawing of what we actually do when we're doing a practice groove plate or a limited thickness cert plate. And then down below we have a weld that's going to be beveled on actually one plate preparation, and then have a spacer put in place there as well. Okay, here's just another example. We've got a V groove that is welded from one side, and then there's also a back weld that's no greater than 1/8 inch tall. Okay, here's another way to draw that same symbol. You start with the V groove first, and then weld the back weld. Okay, then for this example here, we have a 1/16 inch melt through is allowed on a square groove weld. So then you'd actually weld that to where you have material that actually melts clear through the joint. There's surfacing welds. Axial means they run the length of the pipe there. Okay, here's a few more symbols, just looking at some different welds and how they would be executed. Again, some more examples. More examples. Okay, now we're getting into projection spot welding. As if you guys get into this industry, you know, there's references out there to assist you with the symbols as needed. All right, so went through that, got through there. Okay, just going to go back here, actually to the beginning of the slideshow. For this section, you need to understand the symbol and the placement of items on the symbol. But realistically, this figure right here, this is going to be your most important part that you guys really want to study and make sure you know. And that will really assist you greatly in completing the test successfully. So really make sure you study this. We will do a bit of a Kahoot as well. Let's see here. And make sure and go over these as well. If you have to click back and forth in the PowerPoint so you really understand these two sets of problems here, and get to where you can answer them with a high degree of comfort. All right, guys. If you have any questions, please let me know in class. Please watch the video, refer to the PowerPoint as needed, and complete the quiz prior to the test.